Hi, I'm Jack. I'm leading this project on hedgerows.
Right.
Yeah, so the overall title of this project is called Hedges and Edges, and it came around because obviously the Friends have got a new strategy, and nature recovery is a core element of that. For years, people perceived we were a landscape charity and we didn't do wildlife. But if you understand landscape appropriately, you realise that every bit of habitat is also a landscape feature, whether it's a hay meadow, an ancient woodland, or indeed a hedgerow, what we're talking about today. So we've always done wildlife enhancement, particularly on our own land, and many of you are probably aware of that and have been involved in the land management. But importantly, we thought we would pick a couple of habitats which needed improving in the local nature recovery strategy. So the Friends are going to lead on the hedgerow side, partly because we've got a legacy of running the competition and training days, but also our national parent body, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, has got this hedgerow campaign been running for nearly 30 years. And Naomi's going to give us details of the Hedgerow Heroes funding we've got and what we're going to do with it. On the roadside verge side, the Wildlife Trust are going to lead that with the two councils and national highways, because they've done some brilliant work, again, mostly over the last 5 years, get Cumbria buzzing. They've had a lot of funding through national highways on the M6 and the trunk ray roads, done some amazing habitat improvement in the verges. So the overall term is called Hedges and Edges, and I say it's all about trying to deliver biodiversity improvement, i.e. nature recovery. I'm older than I look, so if you go back to '92, well, there was actually an international convention on biodiversity at the Rio summit. Some of you will know that was signed. Britain, the UK endorsed that in 1994. But sadly, in 2023, a report of Nature showed that actually the UK is about the 19th worst nature depleted countries in the globe out of about 218 countries. And indeed, the State of Nature report showed that basically 1 in 6 species in this country are a threat of extinction. And species on average declined by 19% since the 1970s. So the good thing is, by us doing direct work on the ground, we are going to enhance the habitats and hopefully start to reverse this decline in species. The images on the left there's just a couple of special verges in Cumbria, which I'm going to come into more details. That middle image I've just popped up, that was us. We did a little pilot of what we're going to do under Hedgerow Heroes last winter. And we did 3 volunteer planting days, which Naomi is going to cover in later detail. And that group there, they were a group from a drug addiction charity based in London, but they've got a little satellite base in Sedbergh, and there was 5 of them came out with us, and it was really, they had a lovely day, and they'd never done anything like this before, and they went away really happy and buzzing. That image on the right there, that's a hedging contractor, Andrew Kirkwood, who we work with a lot, one of the most skilled hedge layers in the country. And he was actually doing a bit of hedge laying there up on Caravan Park in the North Lakes last winter. And again, he will be doing more hedge laying work for us this winter as Naomi and I build the contracts up. So in terms of Cumbria and special verges, in the 1990s, Cumbria County Council had a great ecologist called Judy Palmer. And with a lot of volunteers, they basically surveyed all the verges in Cumbria, and they identified 640 what they call special verges, i.e. species rich. And inevitably, if you look at that map on the right there was a high proportion in the Eden, South Lakes area. And that partly reflects the fact that a lot of the geology there is along limestone, because obviously the limestone verges generally have a more rich, diverse species of flora. And importantly, she wrote a guidance document for those verges so that the highway maintenance teams, which were all in-house at the time, but now it's generally contracted out, each verge is managed differently according to the species and what you're trying to achieve with it. So I'm not going to say any more on verges. Where we're at across the county on it is that what we're doing, we're gathering that survey data and more recent survey data, including from national highways, and then we're going to start to identify from fresh surveys where these special verges have declined, or we want to actually bring some impoverished, poor verges up to a higher standard. So that will be happening, hopefully, certainly starting next year. But at the moment, it's really a data gathering exercise on the roadside verges. So getting on to hedgerows, we've worked with the People's Trust for Endangered Species, and they have hedgerows as one of their core priority habitats that they want to recovery. And this is a slide I pinched from their presentation, which shows explains why hedgerows are so important as a habitat, because what their officer Megan Gimber says that actually you combine the benefits of these three different core habitats, that sort of woodland edge, which is really valuable, flower-rich shrubland, and also a more generalised pasture. So you can see, as I say, why they're such an important habitat. But you'll get a gauge from this slide that basically hedgerows are an amazing winner. They're really helpful for farmers. You know, in our changing climate, the hedges provide shelter against stormy, cold, windy, wet weather, but they also provide shade. You know, this year we've had a lot of dry, hot temperatures. Naomi are out on a dairy farm just near here in Kendal, and where were the cows? They're all laid up against the hedge, getting a bit of shade from the heat of the sun, because they can get heat stroke like we can, and it affects their milk yield. So you can see how a healthy hedge benefits healthy livestock, and then that benefits the farm productivity. But you can see from that diagram, you know, they protect the soil, they slow the flow of water, they lock carbon, good for wildlife corridors, and they're beautiful in the landscape. And often hedges have rights of way next to them, so we as users of the countryside can see them and experience them. Sorry, there's a lot of data on that map, but it basically plots some of the key species we're looking to recover in the UK against different habitats. So you can see the big winner there is the flowering field margins, but up there, right up there, is the hedgerows on a whole range of species. Interested in Naomi and I had some data from someone quite recently, and they'd looked at parasitic wasps being highly beneficial for taking aphids and other species which harmed oilseed rape crops and things. So you can see how the wild nature in hedges can also benefit the crop fertility. And then also, obviously, hedges are a great source of pollinators to breed and expand in. So what we're doing when we talk about edges, it's not just roadside verges. Naomi and I are also looking at the margin next to the hedge as an important edge, because if you combine those first two habitats on that diagram, you're going to hopefully achieve a significant amount for wildlife. Anyhow, Dawn, our communications officer, spotted this lovely little ladybird book in a second-hand bookshop in Lancaster, and there was a little phrase I want to read out. I think it was in the introduction. This is what that little ladybird book said. It said, "Here in Britain, hedges are a permanent feature in our landscape." Let's hope they are anyway. And we very much take these for granted. But every hedge is a little world in itself, providing most of the necessities of life for birds, plants, and animals that live within its protection. It's a bit old-fashioned, that language, but I really like that. And it's so true that they're a lovely home for our wildlife. I've just finished reading this book. I don't know if anyone's seen this guy on Instagram, or he was actually on the telly as well. I can't remember if it was Countryfile or something, but he's basically a hedge layer and woodsman in the southwest. Anyway, I'd really recommend, if you get a chance, I borrowed it from the library. It's a really good read. He's not only knowledgeable in terms of his land management, woodland, hedge laying, but he's amazing in terms of his natural history knowledge and also other cultural knowledge. So the three species that Naomi and I are going to headline are hedgehogs, obviously the word hedge in it, the gatekeeper butterfly, and actually another name for that is the hedge brown, and probably the yellowhammer as well, and obviously the song thrush. So we'll sort of major on those in terms of species, but as I say, there's hundreds benefit from the hedgerows. And then on the flora side, well, again, there's lots of benefits, but I'm very much a man who loves, the opportunity to get from the fruits that we can harvest from the hedgerows ourselves. And Naomi will touch on an event we're running in a couple of weeks' time on that. But, this is May blossom. It looks stunning, doesn't it, when you get lines of hedges with May blossom on, and we can start to think about our lovely sloe gin in the autumn when the temperatures drop. So I've already touched on this really, but hedges, you can see, this is a hot sunny day in the South Lakes. The sheep are sheltering there, partly under the hedge, but more under that huge oak tree. Because when we talk about hedges, we're also including important hedgerow trees. And this was that dairy farm, an organic dairy farm just near Kendal that I mentioned earlier, where these cows are really tucked under the hedge to get some shade out of the boiling hot sun. So if you think of all those multiple benefits of hedgerows, including that flower-rich, cultivated margin, that hedge there, you can see it's been left, it's probably been cut, over the winter months successively, and you can actually see under those big gaps at the base of that hedge, And you can also see there's actually some horizontal sections. And what that tells us is that hedge has probably been laid maybe 30, 40 years ago. So it's getting out of its rejuvenation cycle. So that would want probably coppicing down at the base and planting the gaps up and letting it grow up and then laying it again in another 10, 15 years. This is a hedge Naomi and I saw over near Coddiston a few weeks ago. It's a lot better, but you can see what they've done. They've put the fence lines so tight in that the livestock is grazing the hedge back quite tightly. So it's still reasonably valuable for wildlife, but we could do better. Here's a really good, thick, healthy hedge. It's got lots of different species in. It's got different heights depending on, there's a big holly tree left there to grow up. But importantly, it's got a lot of scrubby lay. It's got a lot of blackthorn regeneration, bramble in that base. So in effect, that hedge has gone from like a 2 metre margin to a 6 to 8 metre margin until it gets laid again. And you know, every hedge is going to be managed differently. And what Naomi and I are looking for and encouraging farmers is they've got a mosaic of hedge sizes across the farm in different stages of its rejuvenation cycle. So this is the last slide I'll show before Naomi goes into a bit more detail of what we're actually delivering and why. But this graph, again, I got from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, but it showed how over the last 3 years, the government's grants, there were actually capital grants for boundary works, have been so important. You can see, particularly on the planting side, how that green has shot up. But if anyone's seen any media, sadly, that money got spent quite quickly. So the government shut it. Then they reopened it for a short period, for a couple of months, and then all the money went again. So I'm only a simple man, but what I say is a farmer can't pick his hedge up or her hedge and take it to market and sell it. So it's a public good, and we should be rewarding farms and landowners and communities to maintain and plant these new hedges, because they're you know, in our market economy, there isn't a direct income source. There's indirect income benefits, like I say, healthy livestock, perhaps some foraging slows and things like that, but not significant enough to justify the farmer's time. Right, I'm going to go hand over to Naomi, who's going to go into a lot more detail for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jack. That was really great. Yeah, so to begin with, I'm going to start by looking at some of the barriers that are in place that stop farmers and landowners from potentially planting or spending time looking into the management of their hedges. So for me, in my mind, the biggest one is funding. So as Jack was just mentioning there, the government funds that are available for farmers, these subsidies have been very up and down and very infrequent. You know, you have to be extremely prepared with your materials to apply for this funding. And for a lot of farmers, they don't have the time or resources really to be, you know, so quickly applying to these things. So that's one of them. The other thing is we seem to find there are some restrictions as well on who can apply for what. So if you are a tenant farmer, you might not necessarily have the same freedoms that the owner of the land might have in terms of what you can apply for and what you can get. The other thing is it's a very competitive market. Farmers in the UK are constantly trying to keep their prices low, but not so low that they can't afford to continue doing what they're doing. And when you're competing with people working in other countries that can have much cheaper labor and that can supply these things at a much lower rate, it doesn't leave much spare income for a lot of farmers to start thinking about things like hedgerow management. It's simply just not a priority when they're talking about income and spending. And the bottom bit there, that bottom bullet point, kind of carries on from that. So uncertain global markets and weather patterns, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get for what you're producing. So with wars or with differences in trading, you know, you can't guarantee the price that you're getting for your product. So for a lot of farmers, they cannot guarantee profit. And when we're having all of this rain and all of this flooding in the last few years, especially, that has been very difficult for farming communities to try and navigate. So again, that is your primary concern. You might not necessarily have time to think about your hedges. Okay, the next big barrier that I kind of identified would be knowledge. So a lot of farmers, again, because they're very busy, may not necessarily be aware that their hedgerows require improvement in terms of management or species. And to continue on from that, these shifting baselines, so people's ideas of what is normal are constantly changing. Predominantly hawthorn hedgerow, which is very tightly trimmed, might have been normal, say 50, 100 years ago, back when people were really trying to increase their outputs. But today, that isn't best practice. And so it's this shifting baseline of you don't necessarily know what is normal and what is to be expected and what's best. The other thing that I've put there is good and bad species can be subjective. So amongst conservation people, there is debates about what is good and what is bad in the field margin or in the hedge. So things like dandelions are often considered weeds, but they are also a very important nectar source. Things like the difference between red clover and white clover, there is an awful lot of argument even amongst, I guess, what you would call like the in-group over what is correct. So how can you expect someone who's not, from a conservation background necessarily to choose which species are, good or bad? And following on from that as well is a general kind of lack of understanding or knowledge outside of nature conservation groups. A lot of people are very clued in, and a lot of landowners and farmers are very clued in because they know their land. But conservationists can sometimes become a bit of an echo chamber, and you will debate with people who maybe have a similar opinion with you, but a lot of that information doesn't actually burst out of the bubble and get into sort of the general public. So how are you supposed to know what is the correct thing to do when the information isn't being presented to you properly? The other thing is lack of equipment or practical skills. So there's been quite a decline in opportunities for people to train. There's not as many apprenticeships around. There's a lot of young people are moving away to, cities and out of the countryside. So we need to support training, and we need to support this idea of getting people into farming and into hedgerow management. And the other thing which kind of carries on from that is young farmers who potentially be taking over the farm and taking over the management may be so busy with this that they're not necessarily going to be spending their time looking into the hedgerows specifically. They might be much more busy helping out with the more kind of product or practical side of the farm. So they might have less time to kind of consider that. And then the last thing I've put here is time. So we've got a lovely picture here that Jack's put in of from the Gwen Bertelsmann book. So it's from the 1940s and 50s. It's of a hedge laying competition, and you can see they're all using hand tools. They're all using a very kind of practical traditional techniques, and that's quite intensive labor.
I'm never that smart in the countryside either.
But I know, yeah, well, you can see it's old because they've got the caps on and everything. You wouldn't see that today. So that was actually taken in Borrowdale, so a lovely picture there. But yeah, many farmers are too busy to alter their practices. They simply don't have time to consider these alternatives. It's far easier to flail your hedges every year at a set time to the same length than spend time putting together a plan to incrementally trim. For a lot of people, they just do things the way that they've always been doing them because that is quicker. And when time is key, you want to be quick. The other thing is there's quite a few staff shortages and lack of overseas and seasonal labour, especially since sort of Brexit. And if people can't rely on that seasonal staff, then that means that people are going to have to spend a lot more time doing this themselves, or they might not be able to get as many staff members. Or again, going back to the previous slide, there's less people going into the industry that could potentially make up these staff shortages. So that's another potential problem. Also, I've got a fact written down here that globally, half of all farmers are 54 years old or older, and that is quite an old population for the business. So it's quite difficult, if you're going towards retirement or you're getting older, you can't potentially do the same amount of practical labor as these, younger workers would be able to do. But if these younger workers aren't available, that's all you can do is kind of work through all of it. And that is quite a lot of pressure to put on a person. And again, it means that you're so much shorter on time than you really should be. And for a lot of people as well, they don't necessarily have a succession plan in terms of people taking on the farm after they retire or move on. So that's difficult. And then as well, disease can create problems and potentially take more funds from people. So if you're spending money trying to tackle pests and things like that, again, you've got less money, but you also might have less time because you're having to put time into tackling diseases. Yep. And the last kind of point that I've put on here for time is uncertainty around effectiveness of nature-friendly farming. So there is a lot of research to support having large hedgerows, species-rich hedgerows. However, in terms of practice, even though there are a lot of great real-world examples, they're not necessarily always well documented. So it would be for farmers who are having to already have a lot of profits and costs that can fluctuate and aren't necessarily guaranteed, to then put money into something that doesn't necessarily have the best written documentation of success is a gamble. It's a really big risk. So, oh yeah, and the last thing I've put as well, sorry, I'm waffling on, but I've put diversifying income streams as well. So a lot of farmers, especially upland farmers, are having to diversify their subsidies or, not great market price for their products. And again, that means you're spending more and more time doing more than you'd necessarily would have done, 20, 30 years ago. So you're spending more time trying to explore these different income streams. And one of the things that I forgot to mention before is that on average, the cost for 100 meters of hedge is about £3,000. So that's for the trees, for the fencing, for the guards, all of that. That's not even including labor. So you can understand why a farmer might potentially just put a fence up rather than a hedge because of that greater cost. So, yep. Moving on. And then just as a bonus slide, what I've put is fear of judgment. So a lot of farmers, similar to the way people think about their lawns and their houses, don't want to be judged for their, and I've put sort of in quotations like messy hedgerows. So I've been to a couple of farms where I've spoken to the farmer and I've said, oh, they're very trim, they're very proper, like, why have you done that? And they've said, oh, well, my neighbor would judge me, like, I really like my tidy hedgerows, like this is my neat farm. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand that people want neatness, but when we're talking about sort of what's best for nature and nature recovery, having that really tight, neat hedge of just hawthorn isn't really that beneficial. And if anything, you're going to be spending, if you cut down on the trimming, if you're not doing a trim every single year at the same space, you're probably actually putting less work in and less money than if you kind of just let them naturally do what they want to do. So that's another.
I've been in the northeast a couple of times in the last few months, and actually as you move west, the hedgerows are generally in better condition. It's partly because we're more livestock produced in this area, so hedges have got more sort of functional value than the sort of cropland further east. Sorry.
No, that's a good point, because obviously there is that thing of it encroaching onto cropland, which you don't have as much of an issue with here. Which reminds me as well, actually, another thing I was going to mention is around here, we are predominantly, I would say, hill farmers or, sort of marginal land farmers. And in terms of income from 2024, those are probably the places, the areas of farming which have the lowest take-home income. So a lot of those farmers aren't going to be making much of a profit at all, especially if it's a family venture. A lot of the time it's the husband and the wife or the family who are managing the farm, and to have a family income of, say, sort of 30,000 between you is not that high, and it can even be lower than that. So right, so what are we doing about it? So as Jack mentioned before, we've got some CPRE Hedgerow Heroes funding. So what is CPRE Hedgerow Heroes? So it was conceived by CPRE, which is the countryside charity, in sort of 2021, 2022. And it was after they'd persuaded the government to, or were part of a group of people persuading the government to accept the Climate Committee's call for a 40% increase in the extent of hedgerows by 2020, no, not 2025, 2050, sorry, to help tackle the climate crisis. So the first phase began in 2021 after they kind of had this legal win. And it began with only 5 local groups taking part, which within that year, they planted 14, almost 15 kilometres of hedgerows, and almost 5 kilometres of hedgerow restoration. Whereas now we're in phase 5 of the project, sort of 4 or 5 years on, and we now have 13 local groups involved, which are aiming to collectively plant and restore approximately 43,500 metres or 43 kilometres of hedgerow over the entire country. So that is a substantially larger area. So it's really grown. It's been really positive and really, successful over the last few years. And we're hoping to keep this going for the next, 2 to 4 years ourselves. So yeah, it's a really positive project. We're really happy that we were chosen to get this funding. And we've also got some other grant and partner support as well to help us with this. And we're aiming to try and create and restore about 4 kilometres in Cumbria, but I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. And some of the partners that we're working with are the Woodland Trust, the Eden and Lune Rivers Trust, the Cumbria Farmers Network, the Lake District and Yorkshire Dales National Park Authorities, the Nature Friendly Farming Network, Water Catchment Management, CIC, and many others. So we're working with a lot of partners with this. So we're really trying to have, a collective approach. And then here I've just got a map of the phase 5 areas. So all of the ones in green are the counties that are carrying out the Hedgerow Hero work this year. And then hopefully, if it's successful, we'll see more and more counties joining in and becoming part of this. Okay, so this year we're planning on working in 3 target areas: the Water catchment, the Howgills, and the River Petrel catchment. So kind of focusing on the sort of eastern side of the Lake District, but hoping over time to sort of spread that work out to more areas. So as I said before, we've got 4 kilometres of hedgerow work. That's going to be 2,000 metres of planting, 1,600 metres of laying, and 400 metres of restoration. So we're doing a bit of a mixture of works. And through this work, we're going to aim to engage 9 community groups, although, we hope to engage many more groups than that, but that's sort of our base. And then we're going to be running 6 training days, 4 talks, and 5 volunteer events, which I'll touch on a bit more later. And that's just some of our partners as well that we're currently working with. Oh.
That image on the right there, that's the new hedgerow we created at High Borrowdale. With some of you who are listening might have been volunteered and helped plan that. So it's doing really well, because it's quite harsh growing conditions up that valley if you've been up there, because the wind whooshes up that valley and can suppress tree growth. So it's done really well. Sorry, Naomi.
Yeah, no worries. And you can see there as well. Are these our card guards?
No, the plastic tube.
Right, these are plastic, but we had some
on other jobs. So
right, that's brilliant. Yeah. Right, okay. So we've got a couple of images here as well, just showing some of the work that we've done. So we've got this new planted hedgerow at Low Sizer Farm. Oh, there we go. At Low Sizer Farm here. So you can see sort of the young trees. I believe, are these the card guards? Yeah. So for a lot of our planting, we're trying to use card guards. So they're not always suitable for every project, but we found that these ones have lasted quite well. And some of the sites that they've been used on, they've lasted for 2 to 3 years, which is all you really need to sort of protect your trees from voles and from rabbits and things like that at the beginning. And obviously the fencing will keep out, if you have them on your land, any deer. That fencing's a bit low for deer, but. And then on the bottom, we have the FLD hedge laying competition that happened in 2025. So we're going to be having another competition this year as well, which, keep your eyes peeled because it will go on our website soon, but it's not up there just yet. And at these competitions, we have skilled hedge layers practicing their skills and competing to see who can create sort of the best hedge. So we had 22 hedge layers at the last competition, and the hedges tend to get rejuvenated sort of every 15 to 20 years. So this will be a hedge that's probably around, what would you say, sort of the 15, maybe a bit younger than that.
Yeah, it's in a cycle. Yeah. That young farmer there, he's a farmer in Southside, just north of Kendal. So it's lovely that someone in the farming industry taking up the skill, and he does really well, and he goes down to the national championships as well.
Oh, lovely. It's good
to do a lot of people.
Well, that's the other thing, is this work is very good for local people. I mean, we've had quite a few people wanting to come to our training events because hedge laying is a good sort of lucrative skill to have. You can get a decent amount of money sort of per meter for your work. So we've had quite a lot of people interested in learning this traditional skill for their careers and, to help them make money in a sort of rural environment. So it's really lovely to see. Go on to the next one. So we've got a couple other images. So these are both from our sort of pilot studies last year. So the top picture is that Megan?
Yeah.
Yep. So that's Megan Gimber. So Megan Gimber's from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, who came up with the Healthy Hedgerow survey. So this is a survey that can be used by farmers and landowners, which helps, what's the word that I'm looking for? Inform their management plans. And the management plans can then be used to apply for SFI grant funding, which was open in the past. I think it's just opened up again.
No, unfortunately, it's shut that one.
It's shut again.
They're going to reopen. They're going to revise it. I
can't
budget and reopen it on the 1st of April next year.
Right. Okay.
SFI stands for Sustainable Farming Incentive, because you probably know that the basic payments the farmers have traditionally relied on are now being phased out, and there won't be any of it after 27. So in theory, the government's public money for public goods will reward farmers to create hedges and lots of habitats, but we do know that basically isn't enough money in DEFRA's budget, and that's why if we can all work together and help, we can really support the farmers, as you said, Naomi.
Well, this is it. Yeah, we want to make sure that we can support them, like Jack says, when government money is kind of a bit all over the place at the moment for things like this, for public goods. So that's Megan Gimber teaching people how to do this Healthy Hedgerow survey. It's really nice to see people engaging, farmers, landowners, but also just people working in conservation and the general public who are interested in how to manage the land better. So it's lovely to see. And then we've got the bottom photo, which is at Low Sizer. And that's, who was that? Do you remember where this picture is?
Richard Park, yeah, he's the farmer at Low Sizer Farm, just south of Kendal, an organic dairy farm owned by the National Trust. And Richard's quite understated, but he's doing a fantastic job in terms of hedgerows and conservation on that farm, using high-level stewardship support payments.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we're going back there, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll touch on that in a minute. Yeah, I'm going to mention that in a minute. So it's great to see people learning how to do these things to get their money from the government. So we're trying to put a focus on training, and we're going to be doing that again this year.
The good thing with those days we did last winter, because we work with the Farmer Network, we advertised the days through the NFU, the CLA, Nature Friendly Farming Network. 80% of the people who came on these training days were farmers themselves. Often, as Naomi said earlier in the presentation, you organise events and it's just the usual suspects who work for the conservation bodies in Cumbria, which there are many, attend these things. So we were really pleased that we were really basically a farmer talking to the peers, and hopefully encourage more make-up.
Well, that's it. Yeah. And I definitely think there needs to be more of a focus on trying to burst out of the conservation bubble and get people who are actually involved in managing the land more invested in these kinds of things. Yeah. So this top picture here is from our planting day at Alpacally last year. So you can see got a nice school group going there. So that was is it Threlkel? It's kind of hard to pronounce. So that's their year 7 class helping to plant. We also had other people. So we had people from the Love Herder Addiction group. So people who are, and then we had NatWest Bank Give Back a Day staff. So we had some corporate staff coming to help us as well. and then the people visiting the site. So this is Base Camp North Lakes, which is Alpaca Ever Forever After. So we're going to be going back there. And lots of FLD staff and volunteers, so Friends of the Lake District staff and volunteers.
You can see there's tall fences, so the long-necked alpacas and llamas weren't biting us. They had a good go, didn't they, Christian?
Well, did they try?
Oh, they did. Jumpers,
They're
jumpers, great hedge plants.
They're very friendly. They're just curious. They've taken a lot of rescue alpacas there, so yeah.
That's where the bad boys and girls go.
And this one we've got is another one of our hedge laying training days. So this was at Low Beckside Farm. Again, we're going to be going back to Low Beckside to do some planting this year. And yeah, you can just see all of the people getting involved, having a go, using their bill hooks. So that's a nice picture. And we've just got.
Go, aren't you?
I am having a go. Yeah, I'm going to learn how to hedge lay. That's going to be good. Excited, looking forward to that. So we've just got a quick video here now to show some of the work that was done last year and just sort of emphasize, you know, getting people involved in the community.
We're all from that west. This is Craig, Mark, Declan. We all work locally, covering Cumbria, and we've come here today to volunteer to help plant some hedgerows.
Well, I've recently moved to the Lake District. Yeah, so last December. So I've just been looking at what's been going on in the area on Facebook, and I came across Friends of the Lake District. So I want to help look after the land that we live on, so be part of something, so that's why I'm
here. I'm John Loveseth.
Stephanie Loveseth.
And where are you from?
We're from St. Louis, Missouri.
And why are you here?
We're here on academic sabbatical for the year. So we came in August and we'll be here till July. We just wanted to be outside, working on a project that we felt like improved the environment and had to do with the cultural heritage of the area. So we're excited about planting hedgerows today, and yeah, it's fun to learn about it.
Brilliant.
It's pretty neat that we're just staying a couple miles up the road, so it feels like a very local investment into the community that we're in this year, which is quite cool.
I'm Ian. I also work for the Animal Plant Health Agency, so obviously environmental issues are close to my heart. I did a degree in environmental management when I was younger, and it's nice to actually get out in the field and do something proactive, because we've lost far too much hedgerows over the years, and they are an excellent ecosystem within themselves. So if you ever feel that you have a spare end, get yourself down here and plant some hedgerows, because you know there's cake, there's coffee, and there's camaraderie. What more do you want?
Anyway, we'll go over some next steps. So this is kind of what we've got planned. So agreeing projects with farmers, landowners, contractors, and interested community groups. So we're currently underway with that. We've got, I would say, about 2,500 meters of hedgerow work already planned and organised. So we just need to get a few more bits to get it up to 4 kilometres. So if you or anyone you know is in those target areas, so the Howgills, the River Petrel, or the Olswater sort of catchment area, and they need some hedge work done, ping me an email. I think we might have it coming up, but I can always tell you it in a minute. So condition surveying. So with our volunteers, we put a call out to have people help us survey hedgerows. So the first leg of that is going to be historic hedgerow surveying. So we've got some people on file who are going to come in and help us look at historic maps just to see where hedgerows have been and where hedgerows are going to be, or where hedgerows were and whether they're still there or if they've been taken out. So hopefully creating a map of historic hedgerow location. And then we're also in the summer, sort of spring, summer of next year, going to have volunteers coming and doing in-field surveys of the hedgerows. So these are going to be looking at kind of the structural, but also diversity aspects of the hedgerows to get a better idea of kind of their health and their condition. So if you go onto our website into the volunteering section, if you are interested in coming and helping with these surveys, the information should be on there for you. You can go and check it out. Then we've got more skills training and awareness training. So this will be teaching people practical skills. So things like hedge laying. We have 3 hedge laying training sessions planned for this winter. And then also things like management. So management for trimming and kind of how you cut your hedges, but also things like the benefits of hedges for livestock and how you survey hedges. So we've got that planned. Drawing in money from sources to plant, restore and better manage hedgerows. So going forward, we're going to keep looking for pots of money to kind of throw into this project so we can keep it going for as long as we want. And yeah, just try and find money to make this project really what we want it to be. And then fun engagement events. So we see hedgerow foraging there. That's one of the things that we've got coming up really soon. So we've got we've got a hedgerow foraging day coming up at Low Sizer Farm on the 10th of October. So a couple of weeks time. It's really soon. You can see it on our events page on the website. If you want to book onto that, members of Friends of the Lake District go free. So if you're one of our members, you can just turn up. If not, it's just a small charge of sort of £5 a head. So not very expensive, much cheaper than a lot of other foraging courses. So if you want to come on it and taste some hedgerow produce, we're going to have the expert Abby Lawson coming and running that with us. So very interesting event coming up. We won't do your questions yet. Trying to think if I should plug some of the other events, or have we got that coming up? We've got that coming up, right? Brilliant. Right, so I think, yeah, so I think we've got a question section. If anyone wants to ask a question, you can type it, hopefully, in the webinar chat. Yeah. Right, one sec. We're just, oh, it's a separate chat.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to shout loud so people can hear it.
Oh, good.
Right, okay.
Right, so we've got one from Bassa here.
Right, yeah.
He says, does planting just mean the formation of new hedges? So when you're talking about hedgerow planting, are you only ever talking about planting new hedgerows?
No, I would say.
No. So Naomi gave the figure of 2 kilometres of new planted hedgerows, 1,600 of laying, but also restoration. So remember those 3 images I showed early on with that very gappy hedge on the base, where I said the best approach with that would be to coppice those existing plants down, and then what you do, you plant up the gaps. So there can be a hybrid of solutions on the same length of hedge or even on the same farm. Naomi and I are looking at a length of hedge on Friday where there's 126 metres to be laid. There's 114 metres going to be coppiced and plant the gaps up. And then there's another section which needs completely new planting where there's no hedge at the moment. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's going to be a mix of planting depending on the state of the hedge or if there's one there already.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I've got another one.
I should just add, Naomi, I've drawn up quite a diverse species mix. So Naomi hinted that traditionally for many years there was like 100% or 90% hawthorn hedges. Well, given the climatic changes, the amount of diseases coming in, also from a wildlife point of view, we're encouraging a lot more diversity. So sort of 40% hawthorn, a lot more hazel, bits of holly, bits of spindle, the odd crabapple, damson, plant some oak for the standard trees. So we're having a lot more mix, aren't we, Naomi, than traditionally been in the past.
Just to piggyback off that as well, one of the reasons we want to see this diversity is disease protection. So if you have lots of different species, if one of them gets a disease, it's not like all of the trees in your hedge are just going to die. So it's quite good in that way. Also, in terms of flowering, at the moment, flowering is a bit random. So because of climate change, a lot of animals and a lot of plants are doing things at different times of the year than they normally would. So if for pollinators, we want to try and make sure that there is as much pollen available to them for as much of the year as we possibly can. So, and with these kind of changing flowering times or changing kind of times of things emerging, it's even more important than ever that there's a wide variety of pollen and flowers available for as much of the year as possible. So that's part of the reason as well for that diversification.
Okay. That's talking about diversification. Someone has asked, are there any hedges that are made of a mix of plants and human materials, such as wood or stone, things like that? So do hedgerows always just have to be plants, or can they be a mix of other things?
No, that's a good point. Anyone who attended the webinar we did on walls, often very ancient field boundaries from the medieval time were just little earth banks with collected stone from the field. And then subsequent centuries, often a line of hedge. Well, originally the dead hedged on top of that, but then when after the enclosures, we started planting hedges on those old boundary lines. So often modern hedgerows actually sit on an older boundary line. Some hedgerows have bits of post and rail on it, particularly in cow-based farming systems. And the other thing is, there's a rule called Hooper's Law where you try and date a 20-metre section of hedgerow by the number of species within it, and obviously the higher the number, then odds on it's probably a lot older hedgerow.
I guess the other thing as well to bear in mind is a lot of fields will have a bit of both. Most fields will have a bit of dry stone wall, a bit of hedgerow, maybe a bit of fence as well. So, if it fits the shoe, it's probably considered a hedge. If it looks hedgy, I would consider it a hedge.
We've just got time for one more question and then a nice comment. One question. Obviously, this is about landowners and farmers mainly, but if someone's got a garden and they've got a privet hedge or a box hedge or whatever, can they think about hedgerows as well, or is that the preserve of landowners? And if so, where do they even start with that?
I think it's a difficult one when it comes to gardens, because in terms of funding, unlike a farmer or a traditional landowner, you can't necessarily get an SFI or something for your garden hedge. So in terms of funding, that's obviously a different thing. But if you wanted to self-fund a hedge in your garden, really, I would say it's up to you. I mean, if you were planting little whips, obviously it would take a long time for the hedge to form. So if you were worried about your neighbour next to you, for example, and you wanted a bit of screening, you might have to put in a screen and put a hedge in front of it and wait for your hedge to mature over time. But there's nothing stopping you putting a hedge in your garden if you want to, using the same sort of management and the same techniques as you would for just a farm hedge, really. Yeah.
On the website under the Hedgerow Heroes, Naomi and I have got 3 bits of guidance. So we've got one on hedge planting. So if you go on there, you can see the species mix and the ground preparation recommendations which we've recommended, and that applies equally to a garden context, to a farm context. Naomi's going to look at a churchyard graveyard extension a week on Friday, because they need to plant a hedge to create a new boundary, and that'll be a really exciting new section of hedge.
Yeah, no, it'd be really good.
Okay, and I've just got one nice comment, which was that says, brilliant presentation about a fantastic project. Will the Jack and Naomi show be coming to the BBC soon? I hope so.
I don't know. Do they want us to?
Yeah, let's book it.
I've got a face for radio, so we'll let Naomi do the BBC.
Oh,